What's going on, everyone? I am just a typical, average American here today to react to this video here called How I View the United States After 10 Years Living in Europe. So, this is by a fellow American named Joe Barr, and I really want to take a look at this because, if you're like me and you grow up in the United States, you live your whole life here, you really don't get any exposure to what life is like in other parts of the world. So, I thought it sounded very interesting to hear about why this American would rather live in Europe and what he thinks about the US now after all this time. So, let's take a look.
10 years ago, I got hit by a car while riding my bike. About a month later, I moved to Germany where I've been for the past decade this coming August. Getting hit by a car was, in an ironic sense, the perfect send-off for me. It was a culmination of years of close calls with cars, whether I was on a bike or just, walking around my neighborhood. And one of the main reasons I wanted to move to somewhere in Europe was so that this was less likely to happen.
What? Oh my god, this poor guy. That's actually, I've never heard that as a reason for someone wanting to leave the United States. Sometimes I hear about people like Americans who are very unhappy with the United States, like politically, like with Donald Trump or the direction that our country is going in, or even about safety, but not usually this kind of safety, like getting hit by a car on your bike. Probably because, to be honest, like most Americans don't really walk places. Most people don't bike. You don't see that many people biking around, especially outside of like big cities and stuff. So this is kind of a crazy story. So he got hit by a car on his bike and decided to move to Europe. Okay.
And I got it. When I moved from the US to Germany, I couldn't have imagined I'd spend all of my 30s living here. It still seems surreal to me that I've been here longer than my high school, college, and graduate school years combined, and I'm now a German citizen. But
Whoa. Yeah, wow. This is very unusual. Most Americans, like a lot of us never even travel outside of the United States. Let alone this is an American who moved to Germany? Germany. For 10 years and even is a citizen? That's pretty rare.
there was just never that pull to move back to the US permanently. Frankly, I didn't want to go back. Don't get me wrong, I love visiting family, grabbing a beer at Great Lakes Brewing, and something to nosh on at Larder. But I've just found the grass to be greener here, in Europe, for how I like to live. And
Whoa. Now that's some bold statements. So he moved to Europe, specifically Germany is where he lives, and he doesn't feel any pull to go back to the United States. He likes Europe better. Which that really goes against what we're taught in the United States, what most Americans think about the United States. Even if we're upset about a couple things, like a lot of Americans really think that this is the greatest place in the world. So it's actually really interesting to hear, like, from an American who's escaped all that, because I know we are like very much in our own American sort of bubble here where we don't get exposed to the outside world. For example, Europe, what life is like in Europe. So he's saying it's better, at least for him.
this seems to be pretty consistent to the American experience abroad. My name's Joe Bauer, an adventure travel writer and filmmaker based in Berlin, and these are the biggest differences I've noticed after moving abroad, and how I view freedom very differently from how I understood it growing up in the US. The last point is, surprise, surprise, the most important to me.
He views freedom differently? Freedom. Because that's a special word in the US. Like, we believe we are the land of the free, the freest people. I know that's like a very egotistical, almost kind of a naive thing to say. I know how that sounds, but again, something we're as kids in the US that we're taught, literally taught in school, like, do you know that Americans are the most free? We have all the freedoms and all. Um, so that's a big one that he mentions that specifically, that he feels more free in Europe, which I would like to hear more about.
You know, it's to get you to keep watching all the way to the end. You get it.
Guns. Oh, God. Guns. Oh, boy. What about guns? Oh, boy.
I'm going to start with this one, not because it ranks personally high for me, but because it's what you're all thinking about. Let's just take a quick look at the stats. There are roughly 46,000 gun-related deaths every year in the United States. That includes suicides, which makes up roughly 58% of those deaths. Put another way, there were around 13.7 gun deaths per 100,000 people in 2023. That's actually dropped from 2022 and the peak of 16.3 in 1974. But guns didn't play a significant role in my decision to move abroad.
That's what I thought. Like, I know safety can be concerning. Well, honestly, a lot of Americans don't really think of it that way. Like, yes, there are guns here, but again, when you're born here, when you grow up here, when this is just normal life, the American culture, the way of life, you don't really think about that people have guns. Like, it's just normal. Which is probably not a good thing, to be honest. But he got hit by a car. I don't, which isn't funny, but it's just like people around the world think like, oh, in the U.S. you might get shot. Like, that's scary. Guns is like, well, interestingly, that's not what he was afraid of. He got hit by a car.
Don't get me wrong, it's nice knowing that they're not around me in any significant way, or that I won't, wake up to news of another tragic school shooting followed by cowardly politicians blaming doors or unarmed teachers. But again, it wasn't a huge motivator for me because, thankfully, my life has been untouched by guns.
That would be an interesting feeling. That would be an interesting feeling. To wake up and just know that no one around you, no one who lives near you, or if you got in public, nobody has a gun in their car, or, in a lot of states, you can just carry guns like on your person. You can conceal them in a holster. So it's hard to even imagine like that. I imagine that would be like a big relief. Like, I've never thought about it. Yeah, because we're just so used to it. In a weird way, a lot of Americans don't worry about it anyway. Like I said, we've gotten used to it, but thinking about it like he is saying, like he wakes up and he knows that, like, there's a 0% chance basically that there's gonna be any gun violence in the news or in the city or anywhere around. That's got to be a good feeling.
Now excuse me while I knock on all of the wood after saying that out loud. But for comparison's sake, there's roughly just one gun-related death per 100,000 people in Germany. So although it is statistically very unlikely you'll come across a gun-related incident in the United States, I'm more than happy to not have it even be on my radar while living in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the US gets a bad reputation for guns, and I do think it's too easy to get a gun in the United States. I do agree. Obviously, like, our country has so many school shootings and gun deaths, and there's obviously a problem going on there. I'll even admit that as an American, but statistically, like you're still not that likely to be shot or anything. And depending on where you live, you may never see a gun out in public, really. But like he's saying, as small of a chance as it is here in the US, in Europe, like in Germany, it's like zero. Like you're basically never going to see a gun, which is pretty cool. Physical physical and financial security. Are we finally going to talk about like how he doesn't want to get hit by a car on his bike? Why are you more safe in like Europe? Are people better drivers?
Generally speaking, I've felt more secure living in Germany than in the United States. And this is a sentiment I've heard echoed by other Americans living in different European countries. When I talk about security, I'm mostly talking about healthcare and job security. I feel more secure knowing that any unexpected medical issue isn't going to bleed my bank account dry and force me to launch a GoFundMe page. And when I worked in the corporate world, I felt secure knowing that it's generally difficult to fire employees on a whim. An employer has to prove cause when firing an individual, and they more often than not lose when taken to court.
Oh, wow. Really? In Europe, do you have like extra protection from being fired? Really? Is that a thing? That sounds nice. I'd like to know more about that. Um, but as far as like healthcare, yeah, like that's another example of it's like guns in the United States. It's so normal to have to pay for your healthcare, to worry about insurance, to get a bill from the hospital, to avoid the doctor so you don't have to pay. It's all so normal that a lot of Americans don't even really think about it. I feel like that's a lot of things in the US now that he's pointing this out. There's quite a few things here that we just don't think about. Probably because like they're so bad, but we're just used to it or we don't want to think about it. So that's interesting. That's not good.
The system is overall much more friendly to employees over employers. This in turn made me feel more free to live my life outside of work rather than constantly checking messages and responding outside of working hours in hopes of staying on the boss's good side. Of course, it can happen in Europe that you lose your job because of, say, company restructuring. It happened to me. I took a job that moved us from Dusseldorf to Berlin, started in October, and they let go of my entire department by February the next year.
Wow.
But then you just go on unemployment, and there's no shame in being unemployed, quite like in the United States where you can practically hear the Game of Thrones shame bell.
Yeah. Being unemployed, like in the United States, there's a big stigma. People like want you to feel bad. And it depending on your circumstances, it can be quite hard to get support or benefits from the government. I don't know. It just sounds like in Europe, the way you guys approach a lot of things, like job security and healthcare, safety, guns, you guys just live like it just sounds like a lot less stressful, which that matters. That contributes to your overall happiness.
Shame!
Here, you pay high taxes as a kind of insurance to protect you during hard times. When you take unemployment, it's viewed as just taking your own money out. No shame whatsoever.
That sounds amazing. That sounds so I love that. And that's with healthcare too, right? In a lot of European countries, you pay with healthcare with your taxes. When you need a lot of healthcare support, like something that's expensive, then you get more support, and when you don't, you don't. But it all comes from your taxes that you're paying for your whole life. So that's the same with unemployment. When you don't have a job, this sounds like I truly don't understand why we don't do these things. I think because like we think it's socialist and scary and bad and evil or something like that. But like most Americans have, like, we have no idea where our tax money is going. Like, I have no idea what my taxes really pay for. If I knew it paid for healthcare, education, benefits, unemployment, I would love that. I would love that, to know that's what my taxes are for. Because we pay lots of taxes in the United States. Everybody pays taxes. The only difference from Europe is we don't know what our taxes are doing, other than going towards the military or something.
Except for, whatever you feel looking at yourself in the mirror. And if that happens, I think you have bigger issues to work out.
Linguistic and cultural diversity. Oh, I mean, this is something, of course, the United States completely lacks cultural diversity. I mean, on one hand, I think it's cool that we have like American culture. 350 million of us with the same culture. I think that's kind of cool in a way, but we also like are totally ignorant of other ways of life, other philosophies, other cultures because of that, because we're all the same here in the US. So it's good and bad.
After nearly a decade of living here, there are certain things about life that have lost their magic, which is bound to happen no matter where you live. But something that I simply never get sick of is the linguistic and cultural diversity of the continent. When I lived in Dusseldorf, I could bike to the Netherlands or easily get to Flemish-speaking Belgium, French-speaking Belgium, France, or Luxembourg, all in the same day. In Berlin, Poland is an hour train ride away. Prague is about 4 hours away.
A train ride. This is one of the coolest things about Europe that I never thought about as a kid, but now I think about it a little bit. In Europe, like when you live in Europe, you can travel to totally different countries, totally different cultures. Yeah, we have like Canada, which is pretty similar in a lot of ways, or Mexico, but in Europe, there's so many different countries and places, ways of life and languages, and you can like take a train. Like there's trains. You can, and like that's amazing. No wonder Europeans are more thoughtful and worldly, Whereas Americans, I do admit we tend to think very one-dimensionally about how the world should work.
If I'm up for a longer train ride, I can easily get to Western Austria or even Northern Italy. In fact, about a year ago, I took the train from Berlin to Bologna to kick off a fastpack to Florence. Traveling similar distances in the United States, I'd arrive to just more of the same, generally speaking. And of course, I'd have to drive. But that aside, traveling the same radius within Ohio and the Midwest, not much would change beyond the sports fandoms. But here you ride into a completely different culture, language, and history.
That's amazing. That's unbelievable. Like, that's that's the biggest difference between the United States and Europe. Exactly what he's talking about. I can't even imagine what living in that kind of environment would do. It's got to be pretty awesome.
It's something that, even a decade in, I continue to love about living in Europe.
Walkability and public transportation. Yeah, I mean, we really don't have public transportation. We don't walk. We don't have these things.
Now let's get into one of the reasons that was the driving factor for my wanting to move to Europe. Walkability and access to public transportation. Germans, and I'm sure others across the continent, love to complain about how terrible their public transport is. Yes, it's certainly not perfect. Deutsche Bahn, which is our national train operator, revealed that only 60% of their long-distance trains arrived on time in 2025. And people, myself included, love to kvetch about the non-consensual odyssey they've undergone by riding Deutsche Bahn. Still, the American in me is just thrilled it's even an option. The last US city I lived in has a population of roughly 372,000. There are only 4 daily intercity trains departing between 1 and 6 in the morning. I've seen Jaws
Oh yeah, like most like American towns or random towns and cities don't have trains. Like he probably lived close to some big city, There if you're in a big American city like Chicago or New York or Boston or whatever, Los Angeles or something, there's going to be some kind of train or some buses but the United States is huge and a lot of us don't live anywhere close to like a big city or any we don't yeah so and it's funny he he is really attracted to public transportation and walking and biking and that's cool but that's actually not very typical for most Americans. Like most Americans, we want to use our car. We don't want to walk or do act like be have to put in work to work to move our body. And we like the autonomy that a car gives you, that you have total control over your time and where you go. I think a lot of Americans like that's how we grow up. That's how we our whole life works. That's how we get places and we kind of like it that way or that's what we're used to. So, uh, most of us are actually kind of happy with our system. Um, but I suppose there's some Americans who aren't. Him, for example, which is something that attracted him to Europe.
Drop when I've explained this to European friends who've gotten infinitely better service in literal villages. So yeah, the bar is admittedly low for me when it comes to public transit accessibility. On the other hand, the city of Bonn, West Germany's former capital, has a slightly smaller population than 372,000, yet they get roughly 70 long-distance trains per day with an additional 165 regional trains.
What? Is that normal? Like, ha- what do you say, like 60, 70 trains in one day?
This kind of accessibility to public transportation has been an absolute game changer for me and my wife.
Wow.
In our early days, we'd frequently hop on a regional train on a Friday after work for a weekend getaway, backpack over Saturday and Sunday, and then hop back on the train to head home from wherever we ended up.
I mean, it's really cool. It's just nice that this is an option for you. Like you guys, you can have a car if you're European, you can have a car if you want, or you can do this. In the United States, you have to have a car. This is not an option for most people. So it would be nice to even just have this as an option.
This truly fueled my love for the outdoors and led to my career of writing and making films about trail running and other outdoor adventures. In the US, I needed a car to access local, state, and national parks. A car is traditionally promoted as the ultimate tool in freedom. You can go and do anything you want. Car commercials themselves frequently have you imagine yourself speeding down open roads or off-roading across the countryside like some kind of modern-day Magellan. Except, of course, that shit is expensive. According to NerdWallet, the average annual cost of owning a car in the United States is $11,577.
I mean, this is a good argument, and it is a barrier for a lot of Americans. Honestly, owning a car is so critical in the US. Like when I was younger, like a teenager, I just had to have a really cheap, really crappy car. And I'd fill it up 1 gallon of gas at a time. Like if I had to go so like you just it can be difficult.
That is no small fee. And I'd venture most drivers spend far more time sitting in traffic than off on some kind of rogue expedition. For most of my adult life, I saw cars as a stressful and dangerous financial albatross. There are roughly the same number of vehicle-related fatalities in the US every year as guns. But cars are generally not seen as optional, they're a de facto part of life.
I mean that's another thing as far as safety that we don't really think about. We really don't think about. Like driving is dangerous in the US. Like he said, with all the driving related deaths. That's something we really don't talk about.
So much of the way the US has developed forces you into a car. It's not a choice. So how's that freedom? In Europe, I can drive a car if I want to spend the money, but I don't. I have the choice to save my money and travel using public transportation without sacrificing my access to state and national parks, or, society in general.
It's just, yeah, he brings up the freedom. Freedom is, it has to do with how many choices you have, right? So that's a good argument. Like, how is America free if you don't have a choice with a car? You don't have a choice with the healthcare insurance or like with your unemployment or benefits or how paying for school. Yeah, this is certainly a lot of things we don't like to talk about in the United States. A lot of the way that we are limited, and yet we call ourselves free. So I mean, yeah, I mean, this is why it's so important to talk about it. It's very thought provoking. I like this.
All of these points coalesce into a different way of viewing freedom than how I viewed it growing up in the United States, where our navel-gazing take on history led me to believe that we were the only true free nation on Earth. It's a sentiment touched on in the famous opening scene from The Newsroom, where Jeff Daniels' character laughs at the notion that the United States is the only country with freedom.
And with a straight face, you're going to tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom? Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
No country is perfect. In fact, I plan on making a separate video to demystify American perceptions of life in Europe. But when it comes to freedom, I feel far more free to live my life the way I want to here than I ever did in the United States.
Wow. Wow. That's a powerful statement. So he views freedom as the ability to live life how you want. And he felt restricted in the United States, and he feels like he has so much more options in Europe. This is a perspective that we're just not taught about in the United States on purpose, I think. Like in America, we want everyone to think that America is great, which is so we can be good at certain things, but why not talk about what we're bad at? Why not try to improve? Why not learn about Europe and the things that Europeans do that we could do? We could benefit from these ideas. Yeah, man.
Different countries have different degrees of freedom, and different people will have different priorities. For me, true freedom is about having access to society with as few barriers as possible. You shouldn't feel like you're physically or financially in danger for simply existing. In many parts of the US, you simply need a car to function in society, to have a social life, to work, to get groceries. Remember that $11,577? That's a significant upfront cost just to have access to basic life necessities. Here, I generally don't have to worry about gun violence, about going bankrupt because of an unforeseen medical issue.
Yeah, we definitely don't talk about the limitation of a car-based society that we have. Like as a teenager, I didn't have a car until I was a little older. So I had to rely on friends or try to borrow my parents' car. You can't just like go on your bike and do things as kids or like walk or take a bus or a train. For a lot of the United States, you that's not an option. So I never thought about how limiting that was.
And I don't need to own a car to have a life. It bears repeating that life is far from perfect here. No place is perfect, but there are fewer barriers to living a life with dignity. And to me, that's true freedom. But
Wow.
what, pray tell, does freedom look like for you? Let me know in the comments and stay tuned for my next.
Okay, so that's the end. This was great. This is exactly why I was intrigued by this and why I wanted to take a look at this to hear about an the American perspective of Europe because it's something that like as an American I can relate to another American guy talking about how Europe changed the way he thinks and what's better. And that's a really powerful. perspective to hear. So, yeah, this was really thought-provoking, and it definitely made me question a lot of the ways that we do things here in the US. And I think Americans would benefit so much if all of us tried to learn about this kind of these different perspectives and ways of life in other parts of the world. And so this was great. Wow. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on the United States versus Europe, the idea of freedom, and the things he was talking about. That'd be very interesting to hear about, especially if you're a European and you can relate to some of the things has experienced in Europe. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.